It's been a busy week for the Prime Minister on the world stage. He was in Malaysia for ASEAN. He's now in APEC. The officials' talks now underway. Joining me live to discuss this and more in politics is our panel, DPG Advisory Solutions Director of Climate and ESG, Ben Oquist, and the Centre for Independent Studies Senior Fellow, Parnell Palm-McGuinness. Great to see you both today. It has been a big week for the Prime Minister on the world stage, brushing shoulders again with Donald Trump. It seems like, Ben, we've gone from this position where we didn't even know whether the pair were going to get on to now the point that it seems like they're almost besties. How does this play for him at home?
Well, you've got to say it's a huge diplomatic triumph for the Prime Minister, and he's really had it over the coalition, who have long questioned his relationship with Donald Trump and could he pull it off. For a long time they've suggested that it'll be his undoing, and I think some of them hoped for it. But on that measure, it's been a complete triumph for the Prime Minister. Now, for those on the left of politics, it can be a bit cringe-making watching Donald Trump tap you on the shoulder. But the Prime Minister's really done as well as he could have. I guess the wider, longer-term question is how does that set Australia up? Because Donald Trump agreements really can't be relied upon. And I think that's the change in the kind of geopolitical structure of the world and for Australia, is that it can no longer rely as it once did on its greatest ally. So does this kind of short-term win for the Prime Minister kind of mask what really needs to be done for Australia in a region where China, a bully, practising cultural genocide in Tibet, is likely to become the regional hegemon, and Australia's got to get on with China and have a more independent policy from the US as it becomes more unreliable. So yes, I think a diplomatic triumph for the Prime Minister. But are we setting ourselves up for the long term? Well, we'll have to see.
And Parnell, what was your take? Does this put to bed now the doubts that had been there about the strength of the US alliance under Anthony Albanese?
I think it does, and I think Ben's quite right. It was a triumph for the Prime Minister, and to call it anything else would be churlish. I echo his thoughts on the concerns that the left might have around this. I'll be very curious to see how that's received back home, given how unpopular Donald Trump tends to be among Australians. But I also do think that there's a point to be made about the fact that the focus on this relationship between Albanese and Trump has masked a lot of the things that Albanese has been doing in Asia, including an extraordinary investment through IFM Investors, the industry super fund investment arm, into Asia of 175 million Australian dollars, comes to about $250 million all up with various bits and pieces, which hasn't had any examination of what Australia is doing there, how that money is going to be used, and why would it be going through IFM Investors? So, this is a strengthening of the Australian super fund and union system, which has hardly even been highlighted in the mainstream media.
Well, because, the Donald Trump meeting always seems to suck the oxygen out of every single story, doesn't it? The other thing I wanted to point to, Ben, next week there had been talk as to whether the Prime Minister was going to go to Brazil, attend that COP conference. We're still in this stalemate with Turkey as to whether we will secure next year's meeting. Do you think in the end it's going to be a big headache if we don't get that conference next year? There seems to be some reporting that there's some disquiet in Cabinet that they'd be kind of fine if it fell through. Yeah,
it's interesting. I do think it's disappointing the Prime Minister's not going. The good news is that Turkey President Erdogan is reportedly not going, so maybe that's kind of even Stevens there and Australia can win the bid. The good news is that Josh Wilson and Chris Bowen are going, and by all accounts, Chris Bowen wants the COP. He can see the massive advantages in it for Australia, both in finance and investment dollars. I mean, it's a big trade show as well. It would be the biggest diplomatic undertaking Australia has ever had in this country. But with that comes huge opportunities for our relationships with the Pacific and putting the Pacific at the centre of this COP. It's a joint bid between Australia and the Pacific. And as I said, the finance that can flow from it for the Australian government's agenda, their future made in Australia agenda. So the reports that Cabinet is maybe not so keen on it or there are divisions is really worrying. I think if Australia doesn't land the COP bid, there's going to be huge questions asked of DFAT and whether DFAT pulled its weight in getting this COP. So we can only hope that Australia gets it, because it's going to be a massive opportunity for this country. And the Prime Minister not going is a bit of a slap in the face to Malinowskis, who really wants it. But I think it is a Team Australia moment, and we just hope that Chris Bowen can bring it home.
I suppose he's trying to manage his time. We've got Parliament again here next week. Parnell, I had the Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan on last hour. They had this backbench meeting today, but they've agreed to have another meeting. Still no target and not even a guarantee one will be there by Christmas. Where do you think net zero is going to land for the coalition?
I think what they're trying to marry up is the fact that Australians are fundamentally on board with the aspiration of net zero by 2050, but nobody can really figure out how we can get there and if it is even possible. So the coalition is really trying to deal with those facts and at the same time deal with the vibe around it. Now, polls have been showing that there is an increasingly ambivalent middle in this, and that's of course not going to be making their decision making any easier, because they have to be thinking about what they believe, but also how they can talk to that ambivalent middle about the fact that we are trying to reduce emissions, but we're also really focused on energy delivery, on energy affordability, on not losing manufacturing. And at the same time, of course, dealing with those parts in the coalition party room who understand that they really need to reflect the aspiration and the fact that people really like this idea of net zero by 2050 in order to keep their electorates. So, there's a big negotiation going on there, and in many ways, if Albanese were to go to COP30, that would be a gift to the coalition. Perhaps this is why he's not going, because there's going to be a lot of backtracking at COP30 on climate targets. Other countries around the world are looking at net zero and are increasingly admitting that it's not going to be possible, that it's doing harm to their economy. Germany is in a period of absolute stagnation, and in fact insolvencies are up 13% just this month because of the cost of energy. So it's starting to become something that countries around the world are admitting. Now, it would be really inconvenient for Albanese to be at COP30 and having these discussions back in Australia. That would, as I say, strengthen what the coalition is trying to achieve.
Ben, Parnell, we've run out of time. Always appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Trudy.